Ladies and gentlemen, dear members of the German Council on Foreign Relations, it's an honor and pleasure to welcome you tonight to what promised to be an exciting conference on pandemic preparedness, next steps in crisis prevention and crisis management. We are delighted that we have a distinguished panel of practitioners on this very important and timely issue. In fact, who would have thought only a year and a half ago that we would grapple with a pandemic of such a magnitude? Under these circumstances, it is more than appropriate to ask ourselves about lessons learned and conclusions for the future, which is exactly what we're aiming at tonight. We are particularly grateful to State Secretary Miguel Berger from the German Foreign Office that he found time in his busy schedule to address this subject here with us. Miguel Berger holds a degree in economics, has served on a number of very important postings within the German Foreign Service, which he joined in 1988. His very distinguished service includes postings in New York, Bucharest, and Mexico City, as well as Director General for Economic Affairs and Sustainable Development in the Central Administration of the Auswärtiges Amt before he became State Secretary. My special thanks also goes to Dr. Mike Ryan, Director of the WHO Health Emergency Program. Dr. Ryan is a famous epidemiologist from Ireland. He has a lot of field experience to eradicate infectious diseases. Since 1996, he has worked with one interruption at WHO. Since 2019, he serves in his present function. We're also especially thankful to Ms. Paraskevi Michu, Director General, European Civil Protection and Humanitarian Aid Operation at the European Commission. Ms. Michu is a Greek national. She studied economics and law in Athens and holds a degree in information technology from Imperial College in London. Since 1992, she has been working at the European Commission, serving on a variety of influential positions. Since January 2020, she's on a present position as Director General at ECHO. We're also very grateful to my colleague Tobias Werkner, originally from the Foreign Office, but now working as a Senior Policy Fellow at the DGAP. It was him who had the original idea for this conference, and it was again him who pushed all the buttons to make it happen. Thanks to Tobias Werkner, DGAP has taken up health issues as a priority in our event calendar. Especially, I also want to thank very much Dr. Daniela Braun, Policy Advisor and Foreign Security Policy at the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, for having accepted to chair and moderate tonight's debate. Daniela Braun studied political science in Bonn and Berlin, and before joining the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, worked at the DGAP, at the German Parliament, and at the German Marshall Fund Berlin office. Finally, allow me also to thank our event management staff headed by Julia Loeva. Without her and her team, the panel tonight would be technically completely impossible. I include in this also our communication department and all the other helping hands behind the scenes, without whom nothing would work at DGAP. Now I've spoken already much too long, so without further ado, I hand it over to the moderator. The floor is yours, Daniela Braun.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Nickel, for your kind remarks. I would also like to welcome everybody, and I would like to thank the German Council on Foreign Relations for organizing this very timely event. I'm delighted to moderate this panel. The COVID-19 pandemic has led to a dramatic loss of human life worldwide and caused enormous socioeconomic disruption all around the world. Many countries were caught unprepared by the pandemic, despite decades of warning of the threat of a global pandemic, and also despite international planning. With the outlook that COVID-19 will be definitely not the last pandemic in our interconnected world, the question, how can we stop infectious disease outbreaks before they can become catastrophic pandemics, is crucial. While the COVID-19 pandemic is far from being over at the moment, it is not too early to start distilling important lessons from this crisis. And so many international bodies have already started a lessons learned process and have put forward recommendations to improve pandemic preparedness in the future. So just to name a few of these organizations, the Independent Panel on Pandemic Preparedness, the IPPR, but also the WHO, G7, G20, and also the European Commission. And some of these recommendations are already put in place. So for example, the WHO Hub for Pandemic and Epidemic Intelligence here at Berlin is already in an early implementation phase. So today we want to discuss how we can reach a comprehensive pandemic preparedness and crisis management that includes all these different actors. We want to highlight which recommendations have been already presented, but we want to also discuss with you what are the next steps in implementing these recommendations. And I am very happy that I don't have to answer these questions on my own, but rather that I have a stellar lineup of experts here with me. They were already introduced to you, so I will just jump into it because we have an ambitious agenda ahead of us. And my first question goes to State Secretary Miguel Berger. And I would like to ask him, what could be the contribution of systems of early warning and which instruments can foreign policy bring to the table when it comes to crisis management, but also how to improve the existing instruments? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation to this important event. And yes, I can only bring, I would say, the foreign policy perspective to your discussion. And you know, I remember, Ambassador Nickel, that in I think it was in 2017 that Bill Gates came to the Munich Security Conference and spoke about the risk of a worldwide pandemic. And I remember that nobody really, regrettably, nobody really listened to that speech as we should have done back then. And since the beginning of COVID, we here in the Foreign Ministry were really confronted not only with the part of we have to do on the coordination within Germany, our role in the European Union, our international role, but also as those who are responsible for our embassy network worldwide, where colleagues are living really under the most difficult conditions sometimes. And at the beginning, we had to bring back 240,000 stranded German tourists. And let me say, from the impression of the first months, that we lost a lot of time in the reaction to the pandemic. We should have started much earlier to react fast. I think we should have listened to Mark Ryan. I remember the press conferences he gave very early on. And I think if I look back, I think those countries in Asia who had suffered 15 years ago SARS were much better prepared and much faster in their reaction. Then we had the additional problem in the European Union that health is a national competence. And it took us really quite a while to adapt our decision-making in the European Union to the level of the challenge. And I remember vividly the border closures we had, the interruption in our trade. And it really took weeks and months to come up with green lanes, with the necessary decisions, but also with a show of solidarity when we took over patients from other countries in the European Union. So all of that took some time to develop, and I think the emergency response center played also a very important role in coordinating that help. And then the big focus for us was on how to minimize the negative effects on the European economy. And one thing that became clear very early on in the response is really the deficit on digitalization we had. I think not only in Germany, but in Europe in general, and that many processes were much too slow in order to react to the amount of the challenge. There was one issue which was especially contentious, I would say, in the European Union, and that was the question of the joint procurement of vaccines. And despite all the criticism about the frictions which happened in the first months, I really want to underline here that in our view, there is no alternative, and there has never been an alternative to a joint European procurement. I don't want even to imagine what would have happened if we would have said we have BioNTech in Germany and we procure for Germany, and the rest of the European Union has to look where they get the vaccines from. So I think the only way to do it was a European procurement. Yes, we could have done it better. There could have been better processes, but in the end, I think there was really no alternative to this decision. Then the question that we had not only to deal with an international health emergency, but also the socio-economic impacts we saw in many, many countries, the decisions we had to take in order to avoid collapses of economies in many countries, and then the confrontation with what we call the so-called vaccine diplomacy, mainly by China and Russia as a fundamental challenge for our foreign policy. What we did, I think, very successfully in Germany, in the European Union, was to mobilize funding, not only at the international level, so only Germany alone, 11 billion in order to help stabilize many economies around the world. And I think we have established mechanisms which are part of this preparedness discussion, because preparedness, in my view, is not only on health. Obviously, health has to be at the forefront of the discussion, but I think we need preparedness in all areas. And I think the socio-economic reaction to the crisis is an element, a crucial part of that. We then were founding members of ACTA, of COVAX, and despite all the challenges we have had with the implementation of COVAX, I must say we are quite satisfied to see that we have now 190 countries supporting this initiative. And also the signal behind that is to say we want a multilateral response to such a crisis. And I think COVAX has been the right answer. Again, here, not to go for bilateral responses, not to go for European vaccine diplomacy, but to say we want to strengthen the multilateral approach. So only Germany alone has given 2.2 billion euros to COVAX. So we are currently the second donor. And overall, I think if you look at Europe's policy, we have been, and I think we can say that we in the European Union have been the pharmacy of the world. I mean, the fact that we have exported, I don't have the exact figure, but around 400 million doses since the beginning of the crisis. And if I look, for example, at the decisions which were taken in the United Kingdom only to vaccinate their own citizens, exporting zero, the same I think was valid for the US. So the fact that the European Union has delivered vaccines to more or less everybody around the world without an interruption of supply chains. And there was a lot of discussion on this question of export control, but we did that not in order to prevent any export, but in order to have transparency on the process. And I think in the end, the results were very, very positive. And it's something that is not really seen enough in the discussion, that the European Union has played here a crucial role. Now we have taken the decision at national level to give 30 million additional doses to COVAX till the end of the year. Maybe it can be even more. But nevertheless, I think the current situation is not satisfactory. If I look at Africa, only a little bit more than 1% is vaccinated. But at least we can say that the production capacity could be increased in a way that we can be optimistic that through COVAX we might reach till February next year, maybe up to 30% of those who are in need. And I must say I'm pretty optimistic that at the end of 2022, we will be in a position to deliver the necessary vaccines which are needed everywhere in the world. The lessons learned in the European Union, only very briefly, I think one of the key issues was to say we never again want to be dependent for our protective material, for pharmaceutical products on one or two countries. And so even if this means a huge investment, we need to have at least a stock of preventive material. We need to have some basic production capacities in the European Union. That doesn't mean that we will interrupt supply chains, on the contrary, but we want to have at least the assurance that we can deliver at least the necessary products for our citizens in the European Union. The reform of the global health architecture, my last point, this is something where we have been very active. I remember that still under the Trump administration, I think we were instrumental in the World Health Assembly to move the reform discussion forward. We have started the One Health high-level expert panel together with our French colleagues. We have the WHO working group on pandemic preparedness and response, which I think Mr. Ryan is surely explaining more on that, but which met today, I think, the first time. So in our view, to come to an end, the response has to be multilateral, and we have to strengthen the World Health Organization. We have to strengthen the multilateral system, and at the same time, we need to take the necessary measures to enhance preparedness within the European Union. So there are no national solutions. When we speak about preparedness, there are only multilateral. With that, back to you, and thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you, State Secretary. Now I would like to hand it to Mr. Ryan, because we already heard, or we can pick it up from the global health architecture. And I would like to ask him which recommendations for improving crisis preparedness and management in the field of global health are on the table. What is the WHO planning to do? But I would also like to add, today our health minister, Mr. Spahn, was in Geneva, and I believe you also had a little meeting. So maybe you can share some of the things you discussed with him. That would be very interesting to our audience. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And thank you, Daniela, for the introduction, and to Rolf and Miguel and others online. First of all, it's an honor to be here. Second, this is a very German day for me, because we've had Minister Spahn and his delegation here most of the day, and the joint press conference. And also some obviously discussions with Björn Kummel and the Sustainable Financing Working Group for WHO, which Germany is chairing. Our new chef de cabinet is from Germany, and my executive officer, where I work with 20 hours a day, is German. So I'm increasingly immersed in all things German, and that's a very good thing. And in addition to what was said previously about Germany being one of the largest donors to ACT, that's not just a latecomer's gift. Germany has been the single biggest donor to the contingency fund for emergencies at WHO consistently since the fund began. And this organization's capacity to respond quickly is almost entirely based on our ability to access that quick funding. So we thank Germany for that foresight that came long before the pandemic, might I add. So Germany has clearly recognized long before this pandemic the importance of that. I think Germany also recognized the importance of pandemics through a lot of the work that's been going on in Germany with the emerging diseases strategy within Germany, the international strategy part of that, the investments in institutions like RKI, the Robert Koch Institute, and Charité and others. It was actually the first diagnostics we developed in the pandemic response were developed at Charité by Christian Drosten and his team. In fact, we had a sequence on January the 11th. We had lab assays by January 14th, 15th. We had standardized laboratory tests by the third week in January. We had a manufacturer in Germany by the third week in January, and we were shipping validated tests to 156 countries by February the 4th. And we talk about the record in developing vaccine. People forget the record established in Germany for developing diagnostics and getting them out to countries and sharing them. And Germany didn't, in that point, nationalize the production of tests and allowed WHO to work with Charité and with the manufacturer to ensure that all countries got, fair access to what at the time was a small number of tests. So maybe there's some other stories we need to write on this pandemic as well. Sometimes other stories dominate. With that in mind, and I don't want to obviously take too much of your time, you're speaking about recommendations. There's a pandemic of a virus, and there's a pandemic of information, which we call the infodemic. Now we have another pandemic, a tsunami of recommendations. And I've often said, I've been in this game 30 years. If I had €1 or 1 Deutschmark for every recommendation that we've had in this space in the last 30 years, we'd be a fully funded program and we'd have no problem. So it's not an absence of recommendations that has been our problem over the last 30 years. And it won't be the problem in the next 2 years. So far, we've done our own little meta-analysis of some of the most public reports, ones you've seen, the IHR Review Committee, again, obviously chaired by Germany and by
Professor Wieler.
Sorry?
Professor Wieler.
Wieler, Lothar, yes, my good friend Lothar, and a hugely successful process. We have the independent panel, we have the Global Preparedness Monitoring Board, the G7 Economic Resilience Panel, the Pan-European Commission on Health, the Global Health Summit itself, again, very much Germany very deeply involved in that, and the Rome Declaration, the report by the G7, the G20 Independent Panel on Financing Global Commons, and I'm only beginning and I'm out of breath. For those few publications, there were 209 separate key recommendations in those. But what's very interesting, and it probably in some senses reflects maybe what Miguel, you were saying and Ralph about the experience of the pandemic, you'd imagine all of those recommendations will be about new systems and new technologies, and we need to have more machines that go ping, and we need to build more labs. You'd expect that, right? But actually, of those 209 recommendations, 101 are about leadership and governance and coordination. Not about new tech. They're not about genetic sequencing. They're not about rapid diagnostic tests. They're not about predictive analytics and simulation and modeling, right? They're about leadership and governance. So when you start to triangulate so many reports and say, okay, hang on, this is something. And of those, again, I think 48 of those are about financing health security. So if you look at leadership, governance, and financing, of 209 recommendations, 48 are about leadership, governance, and financing, and only 61 about the systems, the tools, and all the things that everyone talks about, the technologies and all of that. So whether that's correct or not, but it'll give you a sense of what people think is broken. But people don't think science is broken. They think leadership and governance and coordination and planning and financing is what's broken. I think it's all broken a little, but it's an interesting, I'll be very happy to share this analysis with you. It doesn't pretend to be an absolute analysis, but you can imagine with all of this, the member states have come together in a working group after the assembly to do two things. One is to pull together all of these recommendations into a coherent set of instructions for the organization and advice for everyone for the future. We can't live in a world of 1,000 recommendations. We've got to break these down and try and forge a path forward. And we feel that path forward will be in these 3 key areas. It'll be about the governance of health emergency preparedness and response, or health emergency risk management. And that's governance at all levels, from community governance right the way through to global governance. It will be, and within that, you can consider things as diffuse as trust and infodemic management and misinformation, not just the classic issues of governance and, coordination and regulation, but the softer parts of governance, which have really broken down in this pandemic, which is that trust deficit that's emerged at many levels of the system, between communities and governments, between governments. There is a trust deficit in this pandemic that needs to be addressed. Second big area is really around financing. How are we going to finance the goods, the common systems? You've all spoken about, the fractured supply chain, the research and innovation, the distribution of vaccines, the preparedness and readiness. We talk about preparedness all the time, but what are you preparing for? You're preparing to respond. Preparedness in itself is useless. It's just a process. Preparedness is about getting ready to react, being fast, being quick, being comprehensive, being able to contain a disease before it spreads and becomes an epidemic or a pandemic. Having that first attempt, preventing the thing becoming a pandemic in the first place. So looking at risk management right along the value chain, from the point at the animal-human interface where you can reduce the risk, to the prevention of the disease in humans by vaccination and preemptive work in the environment and clean water and sanitation, all of those things, right the way through to that first moment of opportunity to detect the virus or detect the outbreak and immediately contain it in situ. Beyond that, to the process of responding to control the disease and obviously mitigating its impacts in health and economics and all of that. All along there are opportunities for risk management, for risk reduction, for intervention. If we look around that, we can see that there are systems and tools at all levels that need to be developed. Epidemics, all crises, in a sense, begin and end in communities. And we need to be very careful that we don't spend our whole time developing global solutions to what are essentially problems generated locally. Epidemics start as small fires. It never starts as a pandemic. It starts as a small incident that grows. And unless we focus our risk reduction, risk management at that local level, we're always going to be behind. I think we've got to say we were behind, we were late, we didn't react quickly enough, because we were like the people on the top of the mountain that thought the waters would never rise to our level. It was going to be somebody else's problem. And then the waters rose, and they rose very quickly. And we got caught off guard. We got caught unprepared. We thought, oh my God, this, epidemics don't affect us. They don't come here. This is not our problem. This is somebody else's problem. And anyway, our systems are so good, we can cope. Neither of those was true. The disease came and we couldn't cope. And we have to look at both of those issues. So we have to look within that, as I said, the governance, leadership, coordination issues, the systems and tools we need, and then how we're going to finance all of that. Because if we decide now that we're going to have to introduce another level of ODA, and now we're going to have epidemics and emergencies now competing with malaria and TB and health systems, all we're really doing is pushing the deck chairs round on the Titanic. We have to bring new money. This is not a health issue. It's a health security issue. It's a security issue. It's an economic issue. It's a national and global security issue. It doesn't just threaten health. It threatens economies. It threatens stability. It threatens social cohesion. And if you had a threat, a microscopic organism that's brought our economies to the knees, a microscopic organism that's brought our health systems to its knees, a microscopic organism that's poisoned relationships at all levels in society, including between governments. If you were to imagine that disruptor, and say, how much are you prepared to invest to prevent that happening again? You'd be talking in the trillions, and you'd have no problem investing that money. And I think that's where we need to discuss, where is the financing going to come for global health security? Is this an investment in preserving our future? A strategic investment in security? Or is it just adding more cost and saying this is another cost we have to bear within the health system or within the development system? And I'll be very, very sad if my program or any program at any level that we get good now, we get our day in the sun, our 3 years when it's very easy for us to raise money, and I'll be running to you, Tobias, and others trying to drum up cash, and it'll be good because we'll be listened to. We're the voice, we're the sexy beast now. We're the ones that are listened to. But the only people we beat are our other programs. I compete against malaria and I compete against UHC. If that's the competition I have to fight, I don't want to fight that. I don't want that battle. The real battle is how do we turn more strategic resources available domestically and nationally and globally? How do we turn those resources towards health security? That's when I think we'll truly see a game change in how we finance global goods, global commons. And that's what the G20 are talking about in their report. They're talking about multilateral funding, new money, not money coming from ODA, new money that will be invested in this new strategic threat to our civilization and to our economies. And maybe I'll finish there because I know I'm rambling on, but as you can see, I'm quite passionate about these things. And I know I'm speaking to, given Germany's track record, given your involvement in our organization, given your strategic views in the world, I know I'm pushing an open door. With regard to Minister Spahn, fantastic visit, lots discussed. Many of these issues were discussed. We discussed the working group. We discussed the possibility of a treaty. He was very interested in the next stage and follow up on the origin studies and finding the answers so we can prevent this happening again. He had one-on-one with the Director General by himself. He had a bilateral with many of us senior staff. He did a press conference. I think he went to the Geneva Institute with to do something down there. And I believe he's probably on his way to Ljubljana by now, I hear. So that's the intelligence report on the whereabouts of your minister.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you also for your passionate comments, but with view to the time, I would like to move on to our next speaker, Mrs. Michou. And let's move on to the European Union now. In the beginning of the pandemic in spring 2020, the EU seemed paralyzed by the sharply rising numbers, and some of the EU member states reacted chaotically and also selfishly, we have to say. What would you say, how could the EU adapt its civil protection mechanism in order to prevent health crises and to react much quicker to such crises and also in a much more coordinated way? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and it's a pleasure to be with you. I listen just from you that in the beginning we were looked like paralyzed. Well, I remember that the Commission at least started having and putting crises and messages and conferences on the 29th of January 2020. And of course, there are many lessons to be learned, how it was coordinated, how the leadership and the governments and the governance went through. But what I want to tell you is in such a crisis that all member states, and I speak now about Europe, all member states are affected at the same time. This is exactly where we need to focus, how we will address that issue. I am the Director General dealing with the civil protection, but I am also the Director General, as DGAP deals with, the humanitarian aid. So I can see this crisis all around the world. It's not only about Europe, but today I would like to speak about the civil protection, which is, as it was said, Rainer said, start small. Well, civil protection, and the Secretary of State said before, we were started by bringing back European citizens from all around the world. And we have worked very well with Germany, but all member states, to combine our efforts to bring the people back. So, well, we have also worked very well to bring public PPEs, protective equipment, to the not only member states, but also all around the world. But what happened? What happened? The production, when we started working on for example, I remember Italy. when we needed to help Italy as Europe, as European Commission, all member states were in the same preparing for being in this equally as Italy was. Therefore, we had to have a safety net of production, of equipment, in order to help Italy and Spain later. And that is why we provided, and this is one of the lessons learned, we revised our civil protection mechanism. We have now the rescue. I am grateful to the German presidency and the Portuguese presidency, because in a record time, we managed to agree on what we need to do, what we need to revise. And for example, now that we are under the implementation, we have a quite big stockpile in our capacity, hosted in different member states, so it can be leave quickly from different positions, from different locations in Europe to other European countries. And we are working more on early warning systems, knowledge network that will build up our knowledge for preparedness, which I have to say we knew before, but we did not take as seriously as it should be into account. So we are working on this also. The Secretary of State said about procurement, joint procurement. I could not agree more. He said about borders. I could not agree more. So all of these issues now, that for us is lessons learned, now we are advanced. And now what we need to do is, with all the recovery packets that we have into our possibility to spend, to be very careful how and what we spend for when and for where. Because as my president said, as my president said, I remember 1 year ago, she said to me, we will have the money, Vivi, but the crisis, you have to be quite smart and imaginary to see what are going to be the new crises. Where I think I will agree with previous speakers is that we started not in a coordinated way. It was very scattered way. And it is not between member states and Commission only. It's also within member states. So I remember meetings in the response center, emergency response center that we have in this building where I am located, that we were asking for a meeting to address the health crisis. And the next day we had the ministers of interiors, and the next day external ministers, and nobody was informed the others what we need to be done, even at national level. So governance, I fully agree, governance at any crisis is extremely important. And I will say, in a crisis, you need to have a leader. You need to have a point of reference. You cannot have many points of references in order to decide. All the others, so a crisis coordination role is a very, very important. In its, as it is in the Commission, as it is in the European Union. I would like to say that I believe that we are much, much better equipped today. The Secretary of State said about the competence. This is also something very important to see how we could, it is not about taking control of competencies, but how we could link competence in Europe and how we could express this solidarity that the civil protection has in its heart in a way that we deliver results to the citizens. Financing is extremely important, very important, but I would say we have to be very strategic on financing. And it is not about quantity only. It's about quality and where you spend and how you perform the reforms that you need to perform in order to address the lessons learned and the lessons and to be better prepared. Last point for me is resilience. We need to stay, we need to prepare for being resilient. And we need always to not to try each crisis to see it as a unique crisis, but also the lessons learned to be used for all crises that we have. And this applies to all, not only health, economic, and many others that we have in front of us. And I believe that with the tools that we have in our hands now, we will be only better to address the future crisis. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Ms. Michou, also for pointing out the last point, which I think is very crucial to also strengthen resilience. And this is not only true when it comes to pandemics, but also other disasters that can happen. Before we move to our last speaker, I would I would invite the audience for posing their questions. You can also raise your hands, and then I can also put you on the. So you can ask your question personally, or you can use the chat. But now we move to Tobias Werkner. And my question to you is, the global health arena is already quite fragmented with a lot of various actors from the public, private sector. They are all trying to improve health worldwide. What are the possibilities and challenges for multi-sectoral, but also interdisciplinary approach, which is so crucial in health to achieve?
Yeah, thank you very much for handing me over the micro in some way or the other. I try to be brief and not to repeat too much of what has been said already. If I listen to the previous speakers, there are a lot of new initiatives. Mike has mentioned them, and many recommendations of different fora for additional activities and measures. When we talk of multi-sectoral approach, that means collaboration among various actors and sectors. It's about a comprehensive approach. I think that comes out of all the different sayings during our meeting now, meaning including actors of different fields, not only health, but also logistics, science, foreign policy, etc. Not only state actors, but also non-state actors like civil society and private sector. And it's about coordination and cooperation between these actors. To look back a little bit into what I experienced when I started in my function as coordinator, I realized that you have many activities and actors who are very engaged in doing great work only in the field of health. You have many international organizations and UN organizations like WHO and UNAIDS, but also UNICEF, UNDP are active in the field of health. And we wondered at that moment if we can ensure that all these wonderful activities are really focused, that they get to the point when they come to the area which we are all caring about. Mike Ryan rightly said it's about the communities. It's about the action in the field. So we started a kind of coordinated approach by initiating a group of Friends of Global Health in Geneva. The aim was get all those actors around one table, be it WHO, UNAIDS, Gavi GFATM, but also actors like Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and very active member states who are in Geneva. And then in 2018, Chancellor Merkel initiated, jointly with the Ghanaian President Akufo-Addo and the Norwegian Prime Minister Solberg, with the same reasoning, the SDG 3 action plan. The same aim, improving activities of different actors in the field, which resulted in the end in concrete plans of the involved organizations to jointly tackle their activities in countries they work with. And we still have to look on the further implementation of these SDG 3 action plans. The advantage of improved cooperation is obvious. All actors should profit from synergy effects, burden sharing, interoperability. We have to ensure that there are no double activities or overlapping activities of the organizations involved. Let me give one more concrete example of an improvement which bridges the experience of different sectors and puts its focus on health from a broader perspective. And Secretary of State Miguel Berger had mentioned it already. It was part of the French-German proposals for the reform of WHO last summer, the initiation of the One Health High-Level Council, with the aim of intensifying interaction between the responsible organizations, which are WHO for human health, the OIE, the World Organization for Animal Health, the FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization, and UNEP, United Nations Environmental Program, in order to improve a comprehensive, and here again we have this word, comprehensive approach towards challenging of our health security. In order to keep our timing a little bit tighter, I will end up with just sharing some observation with regard to adjustment and adaptation of preparedness and crisis management measures, which are all focus. We have to keep in mind, first of all, that some of these recommendations that have been presented mostly in May this year are the result of preliminary evaluation. I say preliminary because we are still in the middle of a pandemic. Such evaluations are like inspecting a locomotive while sitting on a running train. And we have to continue to review our mechanisms and systems even now during the coming months, which might lead to further adaptation of our systems. The second challenge now is to look into possibilities to improve our cooperation while at the same time fighting the ongoing pandemic. And I add an additional challenge. Some of those proposals are already being implemented. So new institutions start working in parallel, like the One Health High Level Council, which already started, but like the WHO Hub for pandemic and epidemic preparedness, which was mentioned already. And we have to ensure that these new mechanisms and their structures are being implemented in a coordinated and coherent way. So far, some of the challenges I see ahead of us, and I will stop here for the moment.
Thank you. Yes, I think this is also a very crucial point, that we have already existing structures and we have a lot of different recommendations now, and we have to make sure that we are not doubling structures that are already in place. But now I want to move to questions from the audience, and I have a first question here in the chat and I will read it, and I think I would pose this question to Mr. Ryan, if he can hear us right now. What are specific areas of pandemic response that could be organized in a more multilateral way? Vaccines, R&D, short-term measures like medical oxygen or humanitarian aid, just to name a few examples.
I think the person asking the question answered a good piece of it. Yes, I think it is important that we actually address the needs at national level. Will be very broad-based. But we need to decide what are the global services that are going to drive successful implementation. I mean, global health security emerges from strong national resilient systems that are interconnected, like the way Paraskevi has said. You need strong systems, you need an unbreakable chain of defense, and that chain, the links in that chain are what the multilateral international system can bring. So where does the multilateral international system bring value? It brings value at economies of scale. It brings value on supply chains. It brings value on investments that are not, that an individual country will find hard to make. Research, innovation, production, strategic decision-making. The development of tools that can be applied in many countries at one time. So certainly global surveillance and that ability to share data, sharing risk, in terms of de-risking research and innovation so we can build solutions, scaling up production at global level for local needs, aligning and managing supply chains so that global systems can meet local needs in many places, as the commissioner said it many times. The unique thing of a pandemic crisis, we're quite good now at responding to a crisis in 1 or 2 or 3 countries. We've become very good at projecting our collective resources into a small area to deliver a result, be it on the humanitarian or the epidemic side, or in European Union on the civil protection side. The extra challenge of a pandemic is that it's a crisis everywhere at the same time. How do you respond everywhere, at every level of the system, in every part of the system? The public health system is collapsing, the health system is collapsing, the economy is collapsing, travel, trade, economy, everything is under pressure. How do you create, and there are global systems that would help. So I do think it's absolutely right. Global financing, global research and innovation coordination, global governance, and having the overarching cooperation mechanisms at regional and global level to manage all of those processes, global supply chains, and the delivery of global tools to local users. So that's where I think we can make a difference in international cooperation. But in the end, it's like I watched a documentary a couple of weeks ago, and I had never realized that you build a suspension bridge from both sides at the same time. You can't build a suspension bridge from one side to the other. You must start on each side and build into the middle. And I think when we talk about global and local, or global and national, that's what we need to see. We need to see an investment in local and national systems. We need an investment in global and regional solutions, and they need to meet in the middle. The global and regional entities and solutions meeting local and national needs, and local and national systems contributing to regional and global security. If they come together, we have a strong, unbreakable system. Thank you.
Great. I would also like to invite the other 2 panelists if they want to add something to this question.
Well, for my side, I cannot agree more with Michael, I have to say. And we face it every day in the areas that we are working, not only on the crisis, I would say. So it is something that we need to bring this to go in the middle by building all these systems that Ryan just said, in the humanitarian, in the RTD, in all systems that we need to develop, even in coordination and cooperation.
Okay, all right. I have another question in the chat. It's also to Mike Ryan. You insisted on the necessity to address local outbreaks early on. How there is a debate about the question where COVID-19 originated. How do you deal with the unclear situation, or how do you deal with the inadequacies of crisis communication by some countries?
Yeah, no, it is very true, because your first and best opportunity in an epidemic is to prevent it starting in the first place. A bit like fires. You take the fire analogy, right? Best investment is fire prevention. Let's not have them at all, right? Second best investment is make sure you have very good smoke alarms. And if the smoke alarm goes off, react quickly, put the fire out as fast as you can. And in a sense, that's where the opportunities maybe are being lost around the world. We're not preventing enough. We don't understand the risk. We're not forecasting. We don't know when they're coming. And when they do come, we're very late in detecting them, in characterizing them, and in communicating that information to others. And then bringing in that response. So we tend, and this is collective. This is not just a China thing. This is a chronic process where countries either don't see the danger, or they think it's business as usual, or it becomes an issue of national pride, and we can deal with this epidemic, but we don't need to tell anyone else because we need to demonstrate that we can deal with it. And then announcing something to another country or the countries is seen as a weakness or seen as failure. It's seen as, well, you failed to do it, and now you're actually telling the world. So there's a lot in there that's behavioral as well as being scientific. So it is something, and if you think about this, and again, I'll just make one point on this. We will not solve local epidemic investigation, control, containment, and origin studies by some global helicopter-based UN black helicopter, New York mediated mechanism of interference and investigation in the sovereign affairs of sovereign countries. It's not going to happen. What we need is countries, every country, to wake up to its global responsibility to detect and contain epidemics for themselves and on behalf of others, and do it quickly for the common good. So it's really important as we move forward, and you're in this world of international affairs. and the foreign services an approach, an external approach to say what we need to do to fix it is make sure we have, you know, teams with parachutes on sitting in Geneva, ready to parachute into countries to stop epidemics. That is rubbish. It's ridiculous. It's the stuff of fantasies, and it's the kind of populist crap, I'm sorry for the language, right, that I hear again and again and again. It won't work. It won't work epidemiologically, and it won't work politically. It won't work at any level. What we need is local response, building up to bringing in international assets as they're needed, the specialized assets, the stuff that you do, Paraskevi, on the civil protection, supplementing the national response, adding to the national response, deepening the national response, making it faster, stronger, more effective, being a resource to containment, not a criminal investigation unit finding out who did wrong and who missed and who made a mistake. This will not work. And I'm sorry to be emotive on this, but this is really important for the future. It's really important. We're either going to see epidemic containment as through a humanitarian and health lens, or we're going to see it through a lens of criminality, a lens of investigation, and a lens of policing. If we start seeing it through a policing lens, we are doomed. We are absolutely doomed, in my view. Now, that's notwithstanding the biosecurity aspects of bioweapons, and there needs to be mechanisms for that. But for the day-to-day, it's really important. Thank you.
Thank you. With view to the time, I have one short final question to all of the panelists. With regards to the countless recommendations that are already out there, what would you say is the single most important recommendation that should be prioritized right now from your perspective that should be implemented? So, and I would suggest we start with Ms. Michu for now.
Well, the recommendation I would said is that for the future is that be prepared and be working together, cooperating and coordinating.
Thank you. Mr. Werkner, your favorite recommendation that you would like to see implemented?
Well, you could name a lot of recommendations. Mike mentioned how many there are, 209. I haven't read all of them, so I couldn't underline which of those I would prefer. I would like to lay the focus on the situation on the ground. So whatever we can do to strengthen health systems on the ground, to improve the capacities of communities, be it with regard to medical equipment or distributions of vaccines. I think we have to focus on what can we do for the communities. That's my suggestion.
Perfect. And Dr. Ryan?
Yeah, I would agree with Tobias. We need to build from the bottom up, bring so global services and regional services to bear local level. That's better for preparedness, that's better for resilience, that's better for response. But I would say, and I'm an epidemiologist, a health person, and I'm always asked by students, you know, Dr. Ryan, you said there I was famous. My God, I'm infamous. It's amazing how you get to the later stages of your life and you're entirely anonymous. And then in 1 year, you become a minor celebrity. It's very uncomfortable for a scientist. And I can assure you, I hope it never happens to many of you. But I'm very often asked, so what are the 3 most important things in containing epidemics? People expect me to say laboratories and epidemiologists and machines and genetic sequencing. And I say 3 most important things in preparing and responding to epidemics: governance, governance, and governance.
Thank you. Yes, and we are already at the end of our discussion. This was a very, very quick hour. Thank you so much for our excellent panelists. I believe it came clear that there is a lot going on with regards to pandemic preparedness, and there are still a lot of things to do. We touched on many aspects today, and I don't dare to summarize them all. The question how we can stop infectious disease outbreaks before they can become catastrophic pandemics will stay highly relevant, given that we are living in an interconnected world. And Yes, so I wish our panelists who are all working on pandemic preparedness all the best for their future work, a lot of energy and strength in their important work. And I would also like to thank the German Council on Foreign Relations for hosting this event. And of course, I would also like to thank the audience for being here with us this nice summer evening and discussing with us on pandemic preparedness. And for now, I wish you all to stay healthy and have a nice evening and goodbye. Thank you for joining German Council on Foreign Relations tonight.